welcome you to this session today, the Precarious Alliance. Maggie Lagouri, who was going to moderate the session, is ill today, so I'm happy to step in. Kim Long, Dean of Business and Humanities, and I'm very happy to have one former colleague and colleague with some very interesting presentations. I was thinking as I looked at it, we're going to get down and dirty here in this session, talking about land of plenty, soil health, and soil biology. So first up we have Christopher Tipping. He has a BS and MS from the University of Delaware in entomology, plant pathology, and systematics. His PhD is from the University of Florida in the entomology and nematology department, in that department. His postdoc experience includes research at the University of California, Davis, working on post-harvest management of pests of table grapes in California, and at the North Florida Research Center, working on the biological control of an invasive leafhopper vector of several bacterial wilt diseases caused by
Xylella fastidiosa.
Thank you. He's published an extensive list of peer-reviewed scientific articles and book chapters covering a wide variety of entomological topics. He gave me some bug socks, and I wish I had one today. He has also described several new species of insects, as well as a novel nematode. He's an active member of several scientific societies, has presented at dozens of conferences. Presently, he serves as an associate editor for the International Scientific Journal, Florida Entomologist in the area of systematics. Here at Del Valle, Chris is a member of the biology department. He curates the Arthropod Museum and offers students the unique opportunity to experience the finer points of systematics, taxonomy, and curatorial techniques associated with museums. He was also an assistant coach for the softball team for 8 years. I didn't know, Chris. And he has served as chair of the plant science department and currently is the interim dean of agriculture and environmental science here at Del Valle. Miss Chris is a great introduction. Let me just say, Dr. Tipping is about to talk to us about arthropods in the soil, the undiscovered country. So again, thank you all for being here. Since we have two presenters, they're going to sort of share the time. So Chris will have about 30 minutes, and then Mr. Hepner will have about 30. So when Chris is done, we'll go ahead and have questions immediately while they're sort of fresh in your mind, and then we'll move to the presentation.
Thank you. Well, good morning. Great to see you all. Some cases I recognize, some I don't. During my talk, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. It's a very laid-back, casual type of conversation I think we're going to have about one of my favorite subjects, the insects that live in the soil, or the arthropods that live in the soil. But, and I use the word undiscovered country about this because when we think about the species on our planet, we usually hear of scientists traveling to exotic tropical locales, jungles of Indonesia have been a hot spot lately where you hear of scientists discovering new species of animals and birds. Well, it turns out to find new species of arthropods, you really don't have to go very far. They're all around us. They're under our feet. And, even in the forests of Del Valle, there's new species of arthropods that we have here. So, quick general question. What is soil? Soil on your shirt is dirt, right? Well, soil actually is a very complex environment. It consists of biotic and abiotic components. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with what we see here. This is the pyramid of soil particle size. Any of you have very specific questions about soils? That's the guy right there to ask. Larry Hepner, who's looking a little bashful right now. So when we think about soil, it's obviously a bunch of particles, right? And some other things as well. The nature of those particles dictate the morphology of the organisms that live in the soil, in particular, things like the arthropods. So imagine yourself as a very tiny organism, maybe a millimeter long, living in an environment that's like a boulder field. How about that? So there's the abiotic part of soil, which is the particles. But the neat part to me about the soil are all the living organisms associated with it. There are so many types of organisms in the soil. The soil is kind of like a, soil is almost like a jungle, if you will. There's so much going on. You got things like fungi, bacteria, protozoa, protista, and all these organisms all make up part of the soil. And they all interact with each other. They interact with the actual particles and the organic matter in the soil. When we look a little bit closer at soil particles, soil is covered with bacteria. So much bacteria everywhere in the soil. So many species. I could spend a day talking to you about it. Generally, fungi and bacteria interact with soil particles, and they actually change the actual physical properties of the soil as well. You can find these charts on the internet talking about all the numbers of organisms you can find in the soil. So there's a tremendous source of biodiversity of the organisms that do occur in the soil. And not only is there a great diversity of them, but there's also tremendous numbers of them. When we think about how many insects are in a handful of soil, or how many species of bacteria could be in a tablespoon of soil, it's amazingly large. So today I'm going to focus on the arthropods, but I do have an interest in nematodes as well. So basically, the soil is this massive community that has interactions of things like worms, mites. If you can imagine it somewhere, and I'll say this later in the talk, somewhere, somehow, some soil organism is doing tremendous interactions here. And all these interactions are also primarily responsible for the interactions that we see above the soil. But I digress. That's another topic I could talk about at another time. So today I'm going to focus on the arthropods. Take a look at those things. Bizarre shapes, almost like science fiction movie monsters. All these organisms have special adaptations that allow them to survive in the soil. Got some mites here, and there's a mite, springtail, Flora. We'll talk a little bit about these groups. There's a small beetle. So let's talk about arthropods here real quick. Arthropoda is a phylum in our taxonomic scheme of how we designate life. And it's one of the, it is the largest phylum on our planet. It consists primarily of two classes. We have the class Crustacea, and those are the things like the crabs, lobsters, and shrimp. And we like to say that they are the kings of the ocean. And the other class is Insecta. And I like to use the expression, they're the kings of the sky and land. And they're the most successful organisms. When I use the term success, I'm talking about numbers of species. Let's think about birds. Birds and butterflies. Birds can eat butterflies, but in terms of biology, butterflies are more successful because there's more species of them. To be an arthropod, you have certain characteristics that make you special. One of them is a segmented exoskeleton. Who here has not seen a cicada skin on the side of a tree in the midsummer? Or maybe you wore them on your shirt when you were a kid. I did. Put them on with a friend? Sure. That exoskeleton is one of the special characteristics of an arthropod. An arthropod means jointed legs. So if you're covered with this external skeleton, which is quite different from yours and I, internal skeleton, it's not very flexible. So to get bigger, you have to shed it. So here's a curly bug or roly-poly. Some people call them different names. There's this old skin right there, a piece of it. So if you imagine arthropods like a medieval knight dressed in armor, you have imagine the armor that a knight is wearing. You have a big piece that covers the arm. You got a piece maybe here. So it's basically parts that are solid and stiff, but at the joints, you can think maybe chain mails underneath that. Well, the insects and the arthropods have the same kind of morphology. They're pseudomorph. So they have these hardened plates, but in between the plates, as well as in between the segments here, is a membrane. It's a little flexible. like to show this picture to my students, especially in Biology 1. A lot of students don't really understand just how diverse the arthropods are. This diagram here, the size of the organism is a relative number of species. See something? You're more than welcome to come in if you like.
Okay, I was just looking to, thank you.
Doctor's
Sorry.
appointment, yikes. So obviously we have a picture of a dragonfly carrying an elephant. So there are more arthropods than all these other organisms put together. If aliens come to our planet sometime in the future, they observe us, they will come to the conclusion this is a planet of arthropods. Maybe they should rename the planet Beetle. There's more beetles than all the other animals put together. That's another story. So, new species are described every month. Dozens and dozens of them. And not just from exotic locales. They're discovered in North America. Temperate forests. Habitats that are all over our planet. So there's a couple problems when it comes to thinking about working with soil arthropods. How do you get them out of the soil? How do you find them to study them? Many of the ones we're talking about are very tiny, maybe only 2 or 3 millimeters. So imagine trying to find soil arthropods by doing this. But we have a couple tools that we use. Oh, quickly, here's another issue. To search and to observe for soil arthropods is to actually disturb the environment and them as well. And yes, bears like looking for bugs under rocks. So we have a couple sampling techniques that we use to separate the arthropods from the soil so we can study them. This is a kind of cool contraption. I have something similar to this, but I have my jar down here near the bottom. So if you take a bunch of leaf litter in the top layer of soil, there's going to be dozens and dozens of arthropods in there. If you put this material in here gently and you don't mash them up, they'll run around in there and eventually they'll want to leave. So they're attracted to this clear glass bottle. They all end up in the bottle, collected for you. That's one way that we sample for soil arthropods. Probably the most common one and very effective one is called a Berlese or a Tolbert funnel. And this device works based on the principles of the behavior of these organisms. Most of the things that live in the soil want to avoid light for obvious reasons, right? They want to be down in the soil. They also don't like to be dried out. They desiccate pretty easily. Soil's a pretty humid place, so you don't really need a thick cuticle. So what happens is you put your sample here, whether it be soil, leaf litter, mulch from underneath a log, any number of substrates here. There's a screen here, and this light source provides not only light, but also heat. All the soil arthropods that are in here are going to be repelled, they're going to avoid that light, they're going to fall through the screen, they go down into this container. Now usually down here we'll have some sort of preservative, maybe 70% ethanol. But if you want to catch live soil arthropods, you can maybe put like a damp paper towel under here, and within a short period of time, a couple hours, all the critters that were in here are going to be down here. But you can't not pay attention to this because all it takes is one spider to fall in here and will eat all the other ones.
Is that from experience?
It is.
Okay.
Yes, it is. As soon as I see a spider, I stop looking. You can make these very easily at home with a 2-liter bottle. This is a Coke bottle. Cut it in half, turn it upside down, forms a natural funnel. There's the screen you can see. Put some material here, a simple desk lamp. This one is to collect live ones. This is just a moist paper towel. This one looks like it might have alcohol or some other preservative in it. So critters will fall down there, they fall into there, and then you can readily look at them quickly. And they're separated from the soil. So it's a very efficient way to look at these little tiny organisms that are unique without too much trouble. We have a YouTube video on how to make one of these if you're interested. You can go to the Del Valle YouTube site and watch it all you want. So, This is a typical sample from a Berlese, a small handful of soil. Look at all those organisms. Not only are there lots of the same kinds, but there's also lots of different ones. And this is across several classes here. Good thing about it, there's not a lot of soil particles in here. I see a few. So it's very easy to separate these out and then to look at them closer. So when you think about the arthropods in the soil is just like any other community. You have ecological niches that the individuals of that community perform. You got things that are predators, parasites, a lot of them are what we call shredders, the grazers of organic material in the soil. Think about what part of a plant is in the soil. The roots, right? So there's lots of these guys that feed on the roots, herbivores. So many types of fungus in the soil, so many types of arthropods that feed on the fungi in the soil. And detritivores. But one thing I've noticed about all the critters I've ever studied that work in the soil, they're all really opportunists. Some that are specifically thought to be fungal feeders will start feeding on a dead beetle if they find it. So it's a pretty competitive environment in the soil. So if you can find a free snack, regardless if it's not supposedly on your dinner plate, you'll eat it. You guys know what this is? Here? These are leaf cutter ants. We'll talk about them right at the end. There'll be some interesting things in the soil. So when we think about how the arthropods utilize the soil, we can kind of create two basic groups. You've got those that are obligated or obligatory soil dwellers, which means they have to live in the soil or they'll die. Things like these guys, dichlora. They're very common around here, and I'll show you how you can find them. Then you have things that maybe spend part of their life history in the soil. This was a caterpillar previously, feeding up on probably some plant in your garden. And when they're ready to turn into moths, a lot of them will bury down into the soil and will pupate, and then the moth will come out. Here's a beetle. It's a rabid female. It's definitely full of eggs. This one's digging almost like a burrow and probably laying eggs in it. So let's just jump right into the organisms that live in the soil. I'll start with this group. This is a generalized term that is a designation for two types of things, millipedes and centipedes. Surely you've all seen these in your house, right? House centipedes. I've never lived anywhere in America where these things are so abundant. There's not a week that doesn't go by that I find one in my home. I had a person call me a couple years ago, and she described it as an eyebrow on a motorcycle. You know, when you think about it, if you've ever seen them run, if you watch them closely, they're actually quite graceful. Their legs kind of undulate, and they're very fast. But yeah, they're a little spooky. I remember when I first moved here, I was watching TV in my house. I didn't have any shoes on, and one of them ran across my foot. I didn't like that. It kept happening. My house was full. So now, whenever I find them, I quickly throw them outside. So the first group within these Myriaphoda are things called the millipedes, or also known as Diplopoda. And surely you've seen millipedes in your yard. They like to hide under logs and rocks during the day. No, they're nocturnal. They walk around. They have some pretty interesting characteristics if you're living in the soil, right? Here's one curled up in a defensive posture. Well, the way you can tell all millipedes, regardless of size and color, is really simple. There's lots of segments that repeat, right? Each one of these segments has two pair of legs on it, one on this side, one on the other. That's how you tell a millipede, regardless of the size, shape, color, 2 legs per segment always. These things tend to feed on vegetable material, fungi, detritus, and if you have one in a jar, if you throw fish flakes in there, they will readily eat the fish flakes. All the soil arthropods I work with, I can't think of any, except maybe spiders, they will all eat fish flakes for some reason. Apparently they're tasty. So you can really tell what an organism eats by looking at its mouth parts. You can tell what a mammal eats by looking at its teeth, right? So the mouth parts of millipedes are little tiny grinding surfaces. They're kind of like nibblers. One thing that's kind of special about millipedes is, well, imagine they can't run very fast, even though they have so many pairs of legs. They're often cryptic in coloration, so they can hide. So to protect themselves, they often produce lots of stinky chemicals. Surely, maybe many of you gardening picked up a millipede and smelled a kind of a yucky chemically smell. Some of them produce all kinds of nasty stuff. But one molecule in particular, cyanide, some species of millipedes produce a cyanide-like compound. So they're toxic. Next group we'll talk about are the centipedes. And these are kind of creepy. They tend to be, tropical species tend to be quite large, and they will actually feed on things like small mammals. They're actually pretty fierce predators. Here's a species, a local one. Here's the head. And you can see underneath the head they have two large chelicera, which are their mouth parts, and on the end of those chelicera are fangs, not like a spider. Well, the way that you tell centipedes from millipedes, let's go back here, is that for each segment, just like the millipede, it's repeated over and over again, you only have a single pair of legs. And they're all centipedes are predators. They all have those powerful mouth parts. Spiders. Many species of spiders live in the soil. I'm just going to talk about a few. This is a species that used to occur where I used to live in Florida, the trapdoor spider. It's really cool. What these guys do is they dig a hole and they line it with silk, and then they create kind of like a manhole cover out of soil. And they have a silk bottom part to it, and they bite it. You can't really see it right here, but there's usually little holes right here where they hold onto it with their fangs. So they're in this pit, this little tunnel. Holding the lid down, and if you actually see them or find one and you try to pull the lid, they'll fight you, but they won't let you pull the lid up. What they do is they open the lid just a crack, and they're always looking. So any organism that walks by, they throw open the lid, they run forward, grab it, go back down in the hole, pull the lid behind them. Here's a common spider that lives around here. I'm sure many of you have seen it if you garden or walking around outside. It's called a burrowing wolf spider, Geolycos. These guys like to dig a burrow. If you could look for them at night, I use a flashlight. Their eyes are very reflective. You can see a spider this size from probably 30 meters away with a bright flashlight on a dark night. They look like little bicycle reflectors. Here's a close-up, kind of cute, like a puppy, right? Look at those eyes. Well, one thing that's kind of interesting is that the females will carry their young spiderlings with them for a while, maybe for a week, depending on the species. And what will happen is when this spider finds something to eat, she'll bite it and hold it there, and the little spiderlings will walk forward and enjoy some of the food that the mom caught. Well, spiders are like really tiny, the fiercest tigers you ever imagined. And they don't tolerate each other very well. You put 2 spiders in the jar, 2 days later you have 1 spider, right? It's like Thunderdome, 2 go in, 1 come out. So eventually these guys decide, I've had enough of you. If I see you again, I'm going to eat you. So if you put these in a jar and they can't escape, they'll start eating each other. So eventually these little guys will disperse. This is one of the bigger species of spiders that live around here. They're probably about, their bodies could be an inch. Yeah, I know, that's the yucky spider face. I see it all the time.
You're giving us bad dreams.
Sorry. Let's move on. So, spiders are part of a group called the arachnida. And there are so many types of arachnids that live in the soil. We have things like scorpions, whip scorpions, pseudoscorpions, sun spiders, regular spiders, harvestmen, some people call them vagabond leggers. And then there's ticks, obviously. So let's cover a couple of these really quick. Scorpions. What's going on here? Why is that thing glowing? Does anyone know? scorpions fluoresce. If you walk outside in the desert with a big black light, you can see them from really far away. This discovery has really led to the decline of many scorpion species because people like them as pets, right? Pet trade guys, they're really easy to catch. Walk around the desert with a big black light, you can't miss them. They glow in the dark. Now, I had a student a couple of years ago, probably about 8 years ago. He didn't believe me, and he had a pet scorpion. So I gave him a black light to take home, and he was so amazed. He took this picture. This was in his dorm. Actually, I'm not supposed to tell you that it was in his dorm, right? And he took a picture with his phone, and he sent it to me, so I always like to use it.
Oh,
If you ever go to Thailand, some of the smaller towns, and I think every nice restaurant has this scorpion lady, right? You can get your picture taken with her. Some happy tourists there. Would I do that? No. Not for me. These guys are really neat. They live around here. They're very small. They're called pseudoscorpions. When you think about the morphology of a scorpion, let's go back here real quick. You see that tail? That's where the stinger is. And she's holding this one by the tail, so we can't sting her. They have like a long tail. Well, pseudoscorpions don't have that. And when you think of a scorpion, you think of those pinchers, right? Well, these guys, these pinchers are not legs. They're modified mouth parts that are just like pinchers. Kind of cool. They're also venomous, these things. And they feed on all kinds of soil organisms. Anything that they can catch, they'll feed on. Collect them with Berlese funnels. These are some of the species that live around here. They're not very large, but they're a very important component of the biology of the soil. One thing that's really neat about these guys is that they're phoretic, which means they will hitchhike on other organisms that go from place to place. Think about an organism that's 3 millimeters long that lives in the soil. How does it disperse? Why not jump on this big jumbo jet and fly to another town? So a lot of them will move from place to place by hitchhiking on the backs of other organisms, particularly insects. It's the big beetle. Let's talk about mites here a little bit. I could spend a whole day talking about mites. There are so many species of mites. They are fantastic in their shapes, and they're part of every ecological niche. Predators, parasites, herbivores. Look at these bizarre shapes. And most of these, I do believe, occur. You can find representative species around here. Again, by using a Berlese funnel. A couple things are going on here. Here's a harvestman. Some people call them daddy longleggers. They belong to the class Ophilonis. And on the back are some mites that are, one, getting a ride somewhere, but they're also parasitic. They're feeding on this guy. They generally have mouth parts that are kind of sharp and short, and they make a little puncture, generally in the membranous area of the joints. Remember how arthropods have this hard area with the membrane here. You can see it quite clearly. Those mites would feed on that. So I like these guys. There's a lot of urban myths associated with them, though. Certain times of year in my house or up on my back garage, I can find sometimes 50, 60, 70 all clumped together in like a big area in the corner of the eaves. So they tend to be gregarious at certain times of the year. Now, one of the urban myths that I heard about them is that they're the most poisonous spiders. First of all, they're not spiders, but they're the most poisonous things. But the reason why they can't hurt you is because their fangs are too big. Well, that's a myth. They don't even have fangs. Their mouth parts look like this. Little pinchers. So when they capture their prey, they actually shred it into little pieces, and that's how they feed. This is a tropical with very exaggerated mouth parts. And these guys do everything. They're scavengers. Here's one that looks like he's found a skink tail, getting a little snack. Some of them like mushrooms. There's one feeding on the city of carp here. Some of them are predaceous. Looks like he's captured a cricket. Look right there. He's got another mite on him, hitchhiker. Kind of look prehistoric, these things, don't they? So they're basically an egg with long legs and eyes up on the stalk.
I don't think so.
They're very ancient, very ancient. Virtually unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. And some are definitely predators. Here's one who's carrying an ant. Some other arachnids, vinegar rooms. Anyone here from Florida? Ever been there? Well, these things are called vinegar rooms because they will excrete acetic acid at you if you pick them up. Until they get upset, they'll spray you. It smells like it's vinegar. Their mouth parts look like boxing gloves with spikes. And they make burrows in the sand and they come out at night. This one is not native to this area, but I threw it in here in case there were some students who had them as pets. These are very popular pets. You can buy them at lots of pet stores. Sulfugids, sun spiders. Maybe you've heard the term camel spiders. There was a couple of years back when members of our armed forces in Iraq would send pictures of them holding these gigantic things out of proportion, giants, camel spiders. They're actually these guys. They're really not that big. But the neat thing about them is, look at these giant jaws. No. So it's for you, okay? These actually occur in Texas. I don't know if you ever had a chance to see them. They're about as big as your thumbprint. They're pale. They're fast. They're
It's all on scorpions.
So let's talk about my favorite groups, the insects that live in the soil. And we're going to talk about the ones primarily that are exclusively in the soil. And all of these members have these interesting types of mouthparts that we refer to as entomathic mouthparts. If you live in the soil, that's the best kind of mouthpart to have. And you'll see that diverse groups that aren't really related have the same kind of modifications to the mouthparts. All of them are wingless. Why do you need wings if you live in the soil? Wings will get in the way. Think about trying to navigate through, imagine yourself as one of these guys, a millimeter long, navigating through soil particles, a forest of boulders. Your wings might get in the way. You might snag them on a rock. So the neat thing about these mouthparts, and all of the entomathic mouthparts, is that the way they work is they are contained within these two structures that are associated with your cheek. The word gena means cheek. So they have these extensions that come down and kind of keep the mouthparts safe. And that allows them to move through the soil so they don't even snag your mouthparts. Think about that. But the cool thing about them is not only can they extend them out, but they can also roll them against each other in almost like a grinding fashion, like a molar. No other arthropods have mouthparts like this. And here's an electron micrograph, and you can see this cheek area is extended forward, and there's the mouthparts that would extend down. My favorite group, yes, I had to throw this in there. This is one I named after my mom. It's found in Arkansas. Interesting group of Protora. Another group that's very common, you can find thousands of them around here, are springtails, also known as the columbella. And these guys are fairly small, and at certain times of the day or certain species, they'll actually be up out of the soil. And you can find them up on rocks, up on plant material. Well, the reason why they're called springtails is because they have this amazing adaptation that allows them to spring away from danger. Imagine a switchblade knife. You know, it's a blade that's held under tension. The kind that swing out sideways, not the ones that shoot out straight. So the way it works is this structure right here is called furcula, and it folds underneath and is connected to another little structure here called the retinaculum. So it's under tension. So they're walking around with a loaded switchblade underneath. And when things disturb them, they release the blade, the spring pops out, and that shoots them very quickly the long distance, hundreds of times the length of the body. Imagine if you could do that. They come in all kinds of sizes. This one here is probably about 3 or 4 millimeters, so imagine how small that one is. Probably doesn't even know Godzilla's looking at it. Some of these have actually moved from the soil and are associated with seashore environments or tide pools. This is Anurita maritima. This is a species that loves to actually occur along the Atlantic coast. You can find it. You go to places where there's jetties or rocks. Sometimes they occur in huge numbers. Well, these things are so small that they can actually walk on the surface of the water. And that's how you see them here in a big pile. Some of them are active in the wintertime in the snow, on snow fleas. Here's a bunch collected from a Berlese sample. Just a handful of soil. There's probably 6 species in there. Come in all kinds of sizes and shapes. Believe it or not, some of them are actually ag pests in a greenhouse. They'll feed on seedlings of any number of plants. If you have, even though they're really tiny, if you have like 10,000 of them in an 8-inch pot, you can imagine the damage that they're going to do. Pillsbury doughboy morphology, I call them. Come in all kinds of colors. They're pretty hairy. These guys really don't spring so much, so they tend to live deeper in the soil. The ones with the springing mechanism tend to be in the upper layers of the soil, or at the soil leaf litter interface. Diptora, another group, common around here. You can find these in the forests of Del Val. There's 2 or 3 species here. Probably one of them at least is a new species. Someone should maybe get around to describing it. Jumping bristletail. Does anyone live north of here? Maybe near Lake Nockamixon, some of the boulder fields. I guarantee if you go out at night, right now, on those boulders with a flashlight, you will find dozens of these things. They're very common. They come up out of the soil at night. Big eyes. And they're covered in scales. So let's talk about 2 groups of insects really quickly, and time is running out. Ants. Let's talk about ants. Ants are everywhere. So many species of ants. So many bizarre morphologies. And all of their morphologies relate to what they do. Some of them are gardeners. These are leafcutter ants. What these guys will do is they'll go out, collect some foliage, take it back to their burrows, chew it up, and they grow a fungus. And that's what they feed on. They don't eat the plants, they eat the fungus that they grow. So, some of these colonies can have hundreds of thousands of individuals. Imagine how much plant material they are recycling through a forest in a month. Some of these guys are slave makers. Some species of ants actually go into the colonies of other ants, take their babies home with them, and when those immature ants become adults, they don't recognize that this isn't my family. They think they're part of that clan, if you will. So they'll do all the housework, while the raiders will go out and, find some other unfortunate ants to kidnap. Pretty interesting. Surely some of you have seen ants tending aphids. Ever see like aphids on a rose bush and you see like ants walking very slowly among them? The ants are actually protecting them, but they're also getting the honeydew that the aphids are secreting, because ants like sweet stuff. They have a big sweet tooth. Some of those ants will actually move the aphids from plant to plant, almost like, say, a shepherd moving his sheep from field to field. And they'll defend the aphids to the death. Termites. Yes. The termite species that live around here are primarily soil dwelling. They live in the soil. And what they become a problem is when they come out of the soil and get into our houses. Now, I put this slide up here because in the spring, termites reproduce with their winged forms called halides. And I get so many phone calls. I got all these termites in my house. And I say, are they termites or are they ants? So I'm going to show you very quickly how you can tell the difference between termites and ants in the future. So if you look at a winged termite here, it has 2 pair of wings that are the same size and shape. Now, if these were winged ants, you have one pair of wings that are large, and you have some small ones here. Oh, this is horrible drawing, sorry. But perhaps the easiest way to tell termites from ants is you have to look at the head, the antenna. All termites have antennae that are straight, like beads on a string. And if you look close, you can see they're bead-like. All ants, regardless of species, have antennae that are called geniculate or elbowed, and they look like this. All ants. So if you're not sure if you have ants or termites, look at the heads, then you'll know. Look close here. Let me see. Oh, there's some right there. That's not an elbowed antenna. So I hope you enjoyed a little introduction to the soil arthropods, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions.